who is God referring to when he says us in Genesis 1-3? And so in this passage, we've got a number of times where God says, let us. And so we've got Genesis 1-26, Genesis 1 verse 26, where he says, let us make man in our image. And then later after the fall in Genesis 3:22, he says, behold, the man has become like one of us. And so the question is, who is the us that he's talking about? I think probably the most common theory that most Christians have heard is that God here is talking to the Trinity. And so all members of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are here. And so the Father is turning to the other two members, Son and Holy Spirit, and saying, hey, let us make man in our own image. And the flaw with this, I think, is going back to what we've already said, it has to make some sort of sense at the time it's written. And so at the point that the first kind of early Israelites, Hebrews, were reading this passage, they have no sense of Trinity in their brain. And so what would it have meant to them when they're reading us? It wouldn't have meant the Trinity. And so then the next explanation I've heard is that it's the royal we. That if you've ever heard the Queen or now King speak, sometimes they use the royal we to just describe themselves, because they're so important. They can describe themselves in the plural rather than in the singular. And we have kind of precedent for this in Hebrew. So, for example, the Hebrew word for God or spiritual being is El. But the plural for that is Elohim. But when we see God, as in our God, big G God written in the Old Testament, often is translated from that plural Elohim. This sense that God is so big, he's so great, he's so important, he gets to be described in the plural. And so that's one interpretation. The interpretation I find the most convincing is the divine council understanding. So we've already mentioned Job 1-2, where God is meeting with his council of spiritual beings. We also see similar things in 1 Kings 22, where we see kind of a heaven open and we see into God's divine council, where God is inviting his spiritual beings to share kind of views and opinions and ideas of what they should do next. And so from this, we can understand that God leads creation with a council of spiritual beings, of angels, for want of a better word. And so in these passages, he is saying to this council, let us make man in our image. And the us here is a fairly kind of generous usage. And so think of when a parent kind of says to his kids, hey, shall we order pizza? The reality is the person ordering is going to be the parent, the person paying is going to be the parent. But in that context, they say, shall we order pizza? And in the same way, God is saying to his divine council, shall we make them in our image? But God is the one that's actually going to be doing all the making. Some pushback that people kind of put is, well, are we then made in the image of other spiritual beings? But the reality is those spiritual beings are made in the image of God as well, in a slightly different image, but in the image of God. And so ultimately, we're all made in the image of God. I hope you found that helpful. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments below. This was a snippet of a much larger conversation, which you can find here, or you can get plugged in with our Bible in a Year commentary just there. Otherwise, I hope to see you in the next video.